Hello again! It's time for us to continue discussing the topic of the Great War with the episode I promised in the previous video. Austria-Hungary is very often described as a complete failure when it comes to military power and actual results during the war. You can find this in German memoirs written after the war and also in modern Western historical studies, although this view is slowly changing. Let's see whether Austria-Hungary was really a hopeless case, just a drain on German resources, or something more. The multi-ethnic empire of Franz Joseph was rapidly developing around the turn of the century, but it had not been able to catch up to Germany, and its military never enjoyed a similar level of financial backing. The army tried its best to secure cooperation between the different nationalities and maintain unity. For this reason, they actually created 3 different branches: the Imperial Army, the Austrian Landswehr, and the Hungarian Honvédség, which also included a Croatian section. The navy was expanding as the new Dreadnought-class battleships and submarines were being built. It posed an actual threat to Italy, but could not really compete with French or British naval power. However, the real problem was a diplomatic one. Austria-Hungary had too many enemies. Apart from conservative thinking and incompetence, this is what resulted in dubious performance during the war. The Chief of Staff, Konrad von Hötzendorf, had argued for a military resolution for years in the Balkans. When the Archduke of Austria was assassinated in Sarajevo, Franz Joseph agreed to finally solve the Serbian problem. On paper, this seemed easy. Austria-Hungary was much larger and more developed than Serbia. However, Russian interference was a huge threat. As the map correctly shows, the army had to be divided between the Serbian and Russian frontier. 1st, 3rd, and 4th armies were sent to the north, while 5th and 6th armies gathered down south in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The great question was what to do with 2nd Army, which was supposed to be in 2 different places at the same time. For about 48 hours, it seemed that Russia would not interfere, so the decision was made to send 2nd Army to occupy Belgrade. Parts of the army were on the way south when Russia entered the war, which meant that these trains had to be stopped, turned around, and sent back north to Galicia. Unfortunately for the Austrian staff, Russia was well aware of this weak point in the plans, thanks to a certain Colonel Radel, who had turned over important war plans to Russian intelligence years before the war, in return for keeping his homosexuality a secret. Radel later committed suicide after his actions were revealed, but there was no time to change the plans, so the Russian 8th Army directed its focus against 2nd Army, which was only partially present. Not more than 30% of the army was guarding its area. They were quickly routed, leading to the fall of the city of Lemberg and most of Galicia. The other 3 armies also had to turn around and retreat, using the Carpathian Mountains as cover. Down south, 5th and 6th armies initially surprised the Serbs, but were unable to move quickly enough due to the mountainous terrain. The original idea to invade Serbia from Bosnia was not bad, but General Potiorek was not a capable military leader. He was unable to take advantage of the surprise, while 2nd Army, that had to be transported back north, was obviously not able to assist. A feeling of personal guilt, desire for revenge, and frustration over the missed opportunity led to massive reprisals against the population, although we should note that these civilians were often not exactly innocent bystanders. While Germany was struggling to keep the Russians at bay in East Prussia, the 4 Austro-Hungarian armies, along with the German 9th Army, spent the next 6 months trying to recover Galicia, resulting in enormous casualties. The repeated winter offensives gutted the army, which lost more than 1 million men. The siege of Przemysl, thank you, Polish friends, for this wonderful name, was briefly lifted, but its defenders eventually ran out of supplies and had to surrender just weeks before the German-Austrian offensive would recover the area. The army was never the same after this. Austria-Hungary did not have the resources to replace more than 1 million well-trained men and their equipment. At the same time, we should emphasize that without Austria-Hungary, Germany would not have lasted a month in the Great War. It would have been impossible for her to stop the Russian invasion alone. Fifth and Sixth Armies continued to struggle against the Free Serbian armies that were defending their own country. Although Belgrade was finally occupied in early December, a Serbian counterattack soon recovered the city. Both sides suffered around 200,000 casualties up to this point, which depleted the Serbian army, but it would take Bulgarian intervention to finally defeat the country and fully occupy it in mid-1915. By that time, the Russian threat was diminishing. A combined German and Austro-Hungarian offensive at Gorlice and Tarnov forced the Russians to retreat. By September, most of Galicia was recovered, and large parts of Poland and the Baltic were occupied by the Central Powers. It seemed that the war could be won, although German assistance would now be needed to achieve significant results. While the Balkans were temporarily quiet, the Eastern Front was pushed back hundreds of kilometers, but then Italy decided to join the war on the Entente side, which further depleted Austro-Hungarian resources. However, the Italians were not able to break through. In the following 2 years, they launched 11 offensives and gained only a few kilometers, losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the process. The relatively weak and small Austro-Hungarian formations in the area were able to hold the line and only gave up territory in an orderly fashion when it was absolutely necessary. In 1917, with German help, they launched a counter-offensive and crushed the Italian divisions, pushing back their enemies and creating a new front line within Italian territory. Back in Russia, the Brusilov offensive in 1916 was a devastating blow to the Austro-Hungarian army, with massive casualties. Some units surrendered, others had to retreat. It was becoming clear that these old empires were crumbling. They resembled two boxers who were on their knees, still trying to knock each other out. Still, when Romania attacked Austria-Hungary, it was able to slow down the invasion, quickly move reinforcements to the area, and then counterattack with German and Bulgarian help, occupying most of Romania. While the Imperial Army was just a shadow of its former self, and the navy barely moved at all, Austria-Hungary managed to hold out until the very end, when even Germany could not take it any longer. We shouldn't forget that it had to fight on 4 different fronts: the Balkans, Russia, Italy, and even France, where 4 divisions were sent in the last months of the war. The fact that in the end the empire collapsed does not mean that it was weaker than its opponents. Among the great powers, Russia collapsed first, Italy was never a serious threat, even France would have surrendered by 1917 without British and American assistance, while Great Britain and the USA were virtually untouchable thanks to their geographical position. Once again, the problem was not of military nature, it was more diplomatic and geostrategic. Germany and Austria-Hungary had way too many enemies. They could not possibly beat all of them. Whatever German memoirs or modern studies say about the Austro-Hungarian army's less than perfect performance, we should not forget that its main goal was to stop the Russian offensive and keep them busy until more German troops arrived from France, to then defeat the Russian Empire together. This they eventually achieved, which has not been repeated ever since 1917. Especially not by those who are the loudest in condemning Austria-Hungary's achievements. Oh well, maybe this is why they are so loud about it. This sums up my view on the subject. I'll see you in the next episode.